Probably the most common question I get asked is, Gary, why don't I have enough energy? Or I just lack the same energy that I had just a few years ago. Or I just don't feel like I have the energy that I really need to get through the day, or the energy I need to finish a workout, or just pick the kids up from school, or just drive myself through an average day at the job. So when you say energy, what I do is I convert that to physiology. So when we talk about energy in the human body, first of all, we need to understand what we're talking about, because everything that you perceive about energy is nothing more than oxygen in your blood. So in a human being, energy equals oxygen. So in other words, if you told me, Gary, I had a lot of energy today, physiologically what you're saying is, I had a lot of oxygen in my blood today. So if oxygen equals energy, which it does, then the question is, how do you get more energy? How do I get more oxygen? Well, what I like to do is I like to show you a visual diagram. Now this is a tree. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna trace the roots of energy from the deepest tip of the soil up into the highest leaf of the tree. So in other words, when you say, Gary, I need energy, really what you're saying is, I need oxygen. So when you get your blood work done, one of the things we're looking at is how well you transport oxygen. So what transports oxygen in the human body is a red blood cell and a fluid inside the red blood cell called hemoglobin. Now it's a little bit more complicated than this, but for the purposes of this video, a red blood cell is like a tennis ball, and hemoglobin is like a fluid inside the tennis ball. So if I just had a bunch of red blood cells, right? And I know that inside of these red blood cells, there's a fluid, right? And the fluid inside of these red blood cells is called hemoglobin. And if I understood that it's actually inside that fluid where oxygen is bound. So this means that if I take a blood test and I'm just low on a few red blood cells, right? And in the few red blood cells that I have, I'm low on a little bit of hemoglobin. Just imagine I take a little hemoglobin out of there. I'm trying to, but you get the point. If I'm low on red blood cells and I'm low on hemoglobin, then what else am I going to be low on? I'm going to be low on oxygen. So the question is, how do I raise red blood cell and how do I raise hemoglobin? Well, I go to the factory that makes red blood cells and hemoglobin. So let's start working our way down into the soil. Where are red blood cells and hemoglobin made? They're made in the bone marrow. Well, if they're made in the bone marrow and the bone marrow is not producing enough of them, how do I get the bone marrow to produce more hemoglobin and red blood cells? I go to the bone marrow's boss. The bone marrow's boss is the hormone testosterone. You see, in a human being, male and female, the hormone testosterone is not necessarily just responsible for male characteristics. That's a common misnomer. Testosterone's primary role is something called erythropoiesis. It puts pressure on the bone marrow to create new red blood cells and hemoglobin. So this means if I'm low on testosterone, I'll be low on the bone marrow's production of red blood cells and hemoglobin, which means I'll be low on energy. Well, it doesn't stop there. What's testosterone made out of? Well, if I get deeper into the soil, testosterone is made of the compound DHEA, dihydroepiandrosterone. You don't need to know that. Again, I just want you to know I'm smart. So DHEA is the raw material that makes testosterone. Testosterone is the boss of the bone marrow. The bone marrow makes red blood cells and hemoglobin, and red blood cells and hemoglobin carry oxygen, and oxygen is what gives you energy. So if you want energy, we got to make sure that this sequence is intact in men and women. What is DHEA made from? How deep can I get into the soil? Vitamin D3, the sunshine vitamin. Cholecalciferol, arguably the most important single nutrient in the human body. The only vitamin that a human being can make. Every single cell in the human body has a receptor site for that vitamin. Every single cell. It works like a vitamin half the time, the other time it works like a hormone. So vitamin D3 leads to DHEA, leads to testosterone, leads the bone marrow to produce red blood cell and hemoglobin, which leads to energy. And that is how we get more energy. We go down into the soil, and first we make sure that our body has the raw material that it needs to produce the hormone responsible for producing our energy. And that is just science.